This is Steve Dupuie for the Bible News Prophecy Program with Dr. Bob Thiel. Dr. Thiel, our international friends may not be aware of the fact that the United States recently passed a $740 billion bill whose intent it is to help reduce inflation. Part of that bill included funding to hire 87,000 additional IRS tax investigation agents. In your opinion, how might that affect churches and other faith-based organizations?
Well, there's a couple different things about that. Let me take this one step at a time. First is that the U.S. Congressional Budget Office doesn't think it's really going to reduce inflation. Now, but one of the things it will do is increase the number of people who work for the Internal Revenue Service, which is the federal tax collecting arm of the United States government. This won't come out really well, and certainly not on the radio, but the Internal Revenue Service, around the time this bill was going through, put up an ad explaining what the major duties of some agents would be. They're trying to hire people. And it says, under major duties, one of them is carry a firearm and be willing to use deadly force if necessary, which is kind of strange for somebody who's just supposed to be collecting taxes. So that part was strange. You know, the United States government actually says they have a voluntary tax system, but our income tax system is certainly not voluntary, particularly if they're willing to, they want to hire agents willing to use deadly force. One of the problems in the United States is the tax code is so complicated, and it's more complicated than, as far as I know, any other country in the world, that even if you call the Internal Revenue Service up and ask how you should handle something, they don't even know. And even if they tell you something, they don't have to abide by it. And they basically do something opposite of the Constitution of the United States, which is they consider you guilty until proven innocent. Now, somebody from Australia sent me a link to a report online about this. And basically, according to various people such as Jenny Beth Martin, who's the founder of a group called Tea Party Patriots, they're concerned that this is going to result in the Internal Revenue Service going after groups who have 501c3 status, which is a type of registration that you can do in the United States if you're tax exempt. And according to this article, since in the past, the IRS has gone against groups that they consider to be conservative or on a bit more biblical side, that they're concerned that this might happen from that. And actually, one of the reports was that the IRS initially denied a Protestant organization tax exempt status because they mentioned biblical teachings in their application. So this is a concern that at least for 501c3 groups, that this could be a problem, and it could be a problem elsewhere. In general, in the United States, the IRS stays out of a lot of tax issues or accounting issues for churches, but this could change it.
Well, then, in that case, with this 501c3 status, is there no alternative available to churches?
Oh, there absolutely is an alternative to this. As a matter of fact, various ones have felt that churches should not register as 501c3 organizations, basically because if they do, they have free speech restrictions. There was something passed in the tax code that affects the tax code called the Johnson Amendment. And it says that it actually prohibits all 501c3 nonprofit organizations from endorsing or opposing political candidates. Now, within the Church of God, we don't endorse or oppose political candidates. So why would we worry about it? Well, one report says the following, quote, as social issues become more political issues, churches and church leaders are increasingly avoiding issues, avoiding taking positions, and selectively addressing biblical principles out of fear of what might happen if they do. And so this is a concern, and you don't have to do that. In the United States, you could function basically as a 501, instead of registering as a 501 501c3 organization, churches automatically are exempt and don't have to do that. And essentially, they become what are known as 501c1a organizations, which basically means that as far as the tax law goes, the government does not have the right to stop you from talking about basically whatever you want to talk about in a religious context.
So churches, in other words, I thought churches had a right, a constitutional right to the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Is that not true?
Yes, except what most churches have done, they've relinquished part of that right by registering as a 501c3 church. They didn't have to do that, but most of them have done so. There's no statute that says you need to do it. As a matter of fact, if you read the statute, it says churches are automatically exempt. They don't have to do this. And so, but if once they do it, they have agreed to be under this restriction. The restriction was put in place in 1954. So pretty much every group church since 1954 has known, if they've registered since 1954, they've known about this. And groups prior to 1954, most of them went and registered later as this. And they've waived their rights. And I don't think the churches should do that. It was not necessary. Basically, as far as I can tell, the reason they do it or have done it is improper legal advice, as well as fear that the top leadership could be held accountable for tax deductions or something if the Internal Revenue Service determines they're not a church. But if a church is a church, why should they be worried? Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Right. And the IRS, or actually the Supreme Court definition of a church is pretty broad. So it's almost impossible if you've got a church where you've got people who attend some type of church services, then they have some kind of religious rights. That's a church, as far as the government is concerned. But unfortunately, people, particularly top leadership in many groups, have been so afraid that they might have some personal liability, my opinion, because that's the reason they would do it, or no lawyer explained it to them. Because I would not have gone that route, and I don't think in the Continuing Church of God, we did not do that. So we have more freedom to speak than a lot of other groups. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why we went on European gospel radio, was because right now there's less restrictions over radio than you have on the internet. Now we can put stuff on the internet, but because of, I don't know if you want to call it restrictions, but anti-biblical bias from big tech groups such as Google and YouTube, I mean two, they shadow ban us, make it harder for people to find that we're out there. But we still have freedom of speech. But again, if you're 501c3, you may have restrictions. As a matter of fact, the prior Church of God organization I was in was worried about this a lot, and it stopped them from preaching certain things, saying certain things, and taking certain positions because they were worried about losing their 501c3 status. And I disagreed with them about that, but that's the way that they went. And furthermore, there's other things that groups could do in the United States. Now I realize for a European audience to say, so what? Well, in the Continuing Church of God, our headquarters is based in the United States. So what we did is basically the best of all worlds. We're formed as a corporation sole, as opposed to something called corporation aggregate, which means basically we answer to God, I answer to God, and we can't have some of the issues that the other groups have had. And it's better for governance and to make decisions and to get things done.
So some of the churches have then given up their rights to the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Are there any biblical prophecies regarding this? I seem to recall something in Amos 8 that talked about churches having problems with the government.
Well, we know, and it says in Amos 8, We know that we're going to have what's typically called the famine of the word. You can read about that in Amos 8 verses 11 through 12. So we know that is prophesied. But until then, what we're supposed to do is what it says in Isaiah chapter 58. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. But if you're worried about 501c3 status or the IRS getting you because you're a 501c3 church, this affects your ability to do this, in my opinion. And again, my prior Church of God organization told me that it affected them. And I was shocked. I was surprised that they held back because of it. But you know, it says, well, actually, Jesus said in Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20, we're supposed to go and make disciples of all nations and teaching everything Jesus commanded. So we're supposed to teach it all and not hold back.
So why you've mentioned these other churches that you were formerly associated with, and that they have a hesitancy to actually fulfill Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Does the Bible address these types of churches at all, or this philosophy?
Yes, basically what the Bible says in the last time, most Christians will be Laodicean. And it's interesting because if you look in the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, the messages to the 7 churches, the last one uses the term, a plural term, Laodiceans plural, suggesting there's a bunch of Laodicean organizations. And Jesus said the problem that they have is that they're lukewarm, which means they won't do what they're supposed to do. And they also, in my opinion, haven't been preparing for the short work as that the Bible also talks about.
Short work. What is the short work?
The short work is to be a short period of time prior to the famine of the word of Amos, when the Philadelphia remnant of the Church of God is going to get his message out in a big way. And in the continuing Church of God, we've been preparing for that. And again, it's also one of the reasons why we went on European Gospel Radio, to prepare for the time we will get more media coverage to get the work done, or the work that we can do. And the other thing that I was going to mention about other groups, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 7:21 and 7:23 said, don't become slaves of men. Don't unnecessarily become slaves of men. If you're a slave and you're stuck, he says. If you're not stuck, you try to get out of it. And by going as a 501c3, I believe that a lot of American churches have chosen to be slaves of men when they didn't need to be.
Okay, that's very interesting. So becoming a slaves of men, giving up our rights to the freedom of speech and freedom of religion, heading towards a famine of the word. How far off might this be, in your opinion? How close are we to all of this being fulfilled?
We're getting extremely close within the next few years, I believe. But you know what Jesus said in John 9:4, he said, I must work the works of him who sent me while it's day, and the night's coming when no one can work. So in the continuing Church of God, we're striving to imitate Jesus and work where we can, realizing that there's more restrictions that are prophesied. Now, the book of Proverbs 22 verse 3 says, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Now, since we in the continuing Church of God, and by the way, other churches of God, should know that more censorship is coming. And the fact that the 501c3 registration results in even more censorship, we decided not unlike other groups, as far as we know, we're the largest Church of God it's based out of the United States that is not 501c3 registered. We took a different route. We did that to have more open doors, less restrictions, so we can preach the good news, the gospel of the kingdom of God to the world as a witness before the end comes, as it says in Matthew 24:14. And we believe that's a very prudent thing for us to have done.
Thank you, Dr. Thiel. For more interviews with Dr. Thiel, as well as written articles, booklets, and videos, log on to our website at BibleNewsProphecy.net. This is Steve Dupuie for the Bible News Prophecy Program.